work our way back and work our way through the New Testament. I'm glad you're back this evening. We had some requests to Facebook Live this message, and I think the message just hits on a important topic for a lot of us. Sherry said to me on the way in, somebody was watching this morning from Washington State, someone that had gone to church here years ago and has been living out there for years, and so pretty cool. You never know. The book of First Peter chapter number 3. Well, I'm thankful for all the stuff that the New Testament has to say about marriage, and specifically tonight we're going to talk about husbands. We talked this morning. I spent probably way too long talking about what the love of God looks like, but when it calls the husbands to love the wives as Christ loved the church, I think it needs to be clear, right? And we're shooting for supreme love, willing to make the greatest sacrifice, and a visible love, something that is visible, that's easily recognized that is, in fact, what we have for our spouse. And anyway, sacrificial when you were here. I'm not going to re-preach the message. But I did say that this evening we were going to hope that the men would come back tonight, our husband would come back, and that we would be able to take the scriptures and open up and look at what the New Testament says about the instructions given directly to husbands. We're going to begin with Peter. I don't have anything against what the Apostle Paul said. The Apostle Paul wrote under the inspiration of the Holy Ghost, and what the Apostle Paul had to say about marriage, and no doubt was spot on. But Peter was married. He had a mother-in-law, and there's just nothing like hearing about a guy that is married, speaking to guys that are married and giving them instructions. And I think that kind of the really cool thing, each of these guys, Paul and Peter both, they talk about potential pitfall areas. But when Peter begins to hit on these different things that he thinks are, under the inspiration of God, important to focus on, he lands on some really rather hot button issues. Next week we'll land on some hot button issues in regards to wives, and things that wives tend to think that are important in the culture and in their lives that probably to God are not quite as important. Physical looks sometimes over the importance of inner beauty, not subjection to their husbands. Anyway, we'll get to the women next week, right? But we got plenty on the menu tonight for our men. But when Peter, first thing that he says to the men when we're in chapter 3, and we'll pick it up in verse number 7, he says, "Likewise, ye husbands," and then he says, "dwell with them according to knowledge." And so it's interesting that if you were behind the scenes and you were in the guy culture and in guy conversation, one of the most common things that you hear among guys, especially among the younger men, is, who can understand women, right? And it's just kind of like a running joke, like we think we have them figured out and then we don't, and who can understand a woman? And so it's interesting to me that Peter, when he lands on the first issue that he talks to men, he's like, you guys need to dwell with, actually really a rather broad statement, that there's a lot of things that can fall underneath dwelling with your wife according to knowledge. In fact, this entire message is going to be a message in regards to dwelling with our wives with knowledge, with understanding. And it's with understanding about, not just our wives, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, what they prefer. We get right down to what sets them off, what sets them back, what they can handle, what they can't handle. When to give criticism, when to not give any criticism, when it's constructive and when it's not constructive. I mean, you can just go down through the list, but it's about what did God say about it? How do we dwell with our wives according to knowledge? What did God have to say about it? Not just about knowing our wife. It's about knowing what God said about marriage, what God said about having a good relationship. Like if we were to set out as men and go, okay, well, all right, younger generation of guys, like here are the things that God said are absolutely crucial in understanding to be able to have the kind of marriage that God fully intended for us to have. Here's what God says about patience. Here's what God says about forgiveness. Here's what God says about overcoming bitterness. Here's what God says about how to love your wife right, what true love looks like. And there's just a kind of plethora of these things, of these issues that we as men of God, that we need to know. We need to know not just our wife and her tendencies and what makes her happy and not, and what moves her forward in a good way, what you need to do to help her, assist her to be what God wants her to be, but it's about what did God say about the relationship. And then I think it's dwell with them according to knowledge. You need to dwell with them according to knowledge of yourself. Like, I know the things that I do that are helpful. I know that there are things that I do and say that are not helpful. And so this area of dwelling with them according to knowledge. What's God say about marriage? What's he say about being one flesh together? And so when he hits it, it's like he's not giving us the option of throwing up our hands and going, well, who can understand them? And so the next move from that is, well, I'm not even going to try. Because if you can't, in fact, understand women because they're so unpredictable, then that would give you a good excuse as a man to just throw your hands up and not give the thing any effort. But Peter doesn't cut us that slack, in fact, at all. He's like, I'm telling you, you need to dwell with them according to knowledge. That's why I've said from time to time that if we men knew as much about our wives as we knew about our cars or trucks or knew about our lawnmowers, that we probably would have better marriages. But we put a very little effort sometimes into actually dwelling with our wife according to knowledge. So we're going to come back to Peter here in just a few minutes, but we're going to just go back and work our way through the New Testament in regards to this issue, instructions to husbands, and in regards to marriage, Matthew chapter 19. And I know that the vast majority of people that are here, you don't need me to take you back to Matthew 19, but at the very same time, when Jesus talks about this issue of marriage, and actually the issue on the table was really rather divorce, and the intent is to bring up this topic and this issue from the Pharisees. Their intent is to, in fact, trip Jesus up, to make him look bad, to try to get him caught into saying something wrong. So when Jesus answered in Matthew chapter 19, and we're just going to land here in verse number 4 and move forward for about 5-6 verses, and then we'll quickly move on. But when Jesus answered, he said unto them, have you not read that he which made them, made husband and wife, that he made them at the beginning, he made them male and female. And I don't want to spend too much time here because I feel like that I have dwelt here, although probably not, on Facebook Live, just the great differences there are between men and women. They're designed differently. We tend to excel at times in different areas. And I certainly understand that the great difference, we almost like at times, we hear the same thing differently. This is why Edgerich said about men and women, men speak blue, hear blue, right? They understand blue. Women, they speak blue, hear blue, or pink. They speak pink and hear pink and see things through pink lenses. And because we're just so different. It's amazing to me, never ceases to amaze me how Sherry and I, after so many years, can sometimes see the same issue so vastly differently. And when we say something, we could even say the same thing and we hear it differently. But that's because God made them from the beginning. He made them male and female. He made the wife to be a helpmeet to the husband. He designed her to complement him. And because of these things, there just are some differences, and there are some vast differences. And so when we come to the issue of marriage, we just have to understand that there are differences that need to be considered between male and female. When you get to verse 5, he said, in fact, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. So already in 2 verses, he's talked about the issue as, God from the beginning, he made them different on purpose, male and female, and that in marriage we leave our father and our mother, and that the priority relationship now after we get married is to our spouse and not to our parents, although it doesn't release us from our biblical responsibilities to our parents and honoring our father and mother until the day that they pass out of this life. But it does change the priority of the relationship. And sometimes we cleave a little bit too hard to mom and dad rather than cleaving to our wife, that there is this leaving father and mother. And then the third thing he talks about is the necessity of then cleaving to your wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. The fourth issue that he talks about is the issue of how we become one. This one flesh relationship is crucial to understand because, again, as I say over and over to this congregation, in a one flesh relationship, we rise together, we fall together, we win together, we lose together. And so in a one flesh relationship, it becomes crucial that we understand how this one flesh relationship works, that we need to make sure that we're working together. In fact, it's in many ways the very basis of a marriage relationship, that is two people joined together in a one flesh relationship that have to learn how to account for each other's differences, how their differences complement each other, that together two are better than one for a lot of different reasons, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So in this relationship, he puts us in marriage. It is a male and female. It's a leave father and mother, cleave unto our wife, and they two are going to be one flesh. Verse 6, wherefore they are no more twain or two, but in fact he says one flesh. So much are they one flesh that when Adam and Eve were married in that very first book of the Bible, that when God referred to them, he called their name Adam. And so it's the very basis of us bringing in, and when the wife taking on the husband's last name. Wherefore they are no more twain, but they're one flesh. And what the fifth principle is, what therefore God has joined together, then let not man put asunder. That this is not a relationship that should easily be laid by the wayside. And so the critics that were there that were trying to make Jesus look bad, trip him up, they said unto him, well, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement to put her away? If the intent of God was that one woman and one man marry and until death do they part, why in fact then would God make this provision and allow Moses then to command them to give a writing of divorcement if God never intended for people to get divorced? Well, in verse number 8, he says very clearly, he saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, he suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. So divorce was an allowment by God because of the hardness of people's hearts, and it is probably the most common reason why people in fact get divorced, is that circumstances happen, things happen in the marriage relationship, sometimes things that were unforeseen. We gradually over a period of time get a hard heart toward each other, and in that hard heart relationship, if you never have forgiveness, if you never have reconciliation with each other, then it makes it very difficult to live together, because you get harder and the relationship gets colder, and so it wasn't God's plan. And understanding just at the very basis of all of these 5 basic principles that we have in regards to marriage, the issue of there are some natural differences between us. God intended for it to be that way for a good purpose. The leaving, the cleaving, the one flesh relationship, and then that God didn't want that relationship to bust up. In fact, in verse number 9, and I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and fornication is kind of a broad category. I know we have some young kids in here, so I've got to be kind of cautious, but fornication isn't just only adultery. It's a broad relationship that covers sexual impurity, immorality, but whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication. And if you do that and you marry another, the fact is that we commit adultery. And whoso marrieth her, which is put away, does commit adultery. Because this relationship is what God has joined together. Let not man put asunder. That God is the one that brings us into this relationship, and he is therefore the one that decides the terms of the relationship and what reasons we can get out of the relationship. And when we are bound up in a covenantal relationship with somebody, then it's a binding relationship. Let me just give you a good example. Contract is a little bit different maybe than a covenant. I don't want to get into all that, but let's just say this. Let's just say that you have a house that you borrowed money on for 20 years. You get 10 years into that purchase of the home. You still owe, about half of what you borrowed on the home. Some of you are going to say a lot more but that's not the point. So you still owe half on this thing 10 years into the relationship. Well, and you go, you know what? I don't like this house anymore. This house got issues, and I can't afford to fix this and this and this. And you know what? I think I'm just leaving. I'm just going to walk away from it. But it's not that simple, is it? It's not that simple just to go, well, hey, I'm hopping out of this relationship, and to call your bank and say, it's yours now. And they would say, well, you're still under contract for the remaining balance, right? Because in this type of relationship, in a covenantal or even in a contractual relationship, there are binding. That's a very binding relationship, and that we are required to do our part and what we committed to doing. So when we jump out of the book of Matthew, chapter number 19, we land very squarely in the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter number 7, and we're going to hit a couple things in chapter 7. Because people were asking the Apostle Paul, people from the church at Corinth were asking the Apostle Paul, what about some of these issues? What about the issue of celibacy? Is it better to live a celibate life than it is to live a married life? And then they have some other questions about what if a believer finds herself or himself married to an unbeliever? How do you deal with that kind of a situation? And so the Apostle Paul, when you land in chapter 7, he's answering questions. Chapter 7, verse 1, now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, so obviously he got a letter, and they're like, hey, we have some questions. And what a great place to go to ask questions from the man of God that knows the will of God. Is a great place to start when we're seeking for some wisdom in regards to what God thinks about an issue. Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man to not touch a woman. And I think we just need to be cautious how in-depth we go on that particular verse. I think with everything in the Scripture, it's easy enough to get out of balance to the extremes. Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, he writes, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Now, in the remainder of the chapter, he's going to talk about there are benefits of being celibate. Jesus even spoke about this issue in Matthew chapter number 19, which we didn't even go to the trouble to looking at it, that he talks about there are some people that are eunuchs, by man, and he goes on to talk about there are some eunuchs that are eunuchs for the Lord's sake, that in other words, they choose to remain single, unmarried, and to, abstain from some of these fleshly desires for the intent of serving the Lord. And so the Apostle Paul, some people say he had to have been married before, or he couldn't have sat on the Sanhedrin council, and I don't know whether that's true or that's untrue. So some people say the Apostle Paul was married, and then something happened that he wasn't married, if his wife left him maybe when he converted to Christianity. But if that's the truth, if that's so, he doesn't mention anything about it. And then other people that he in fact never was married. But the question is, is it what's norm? It's good for man. It's not good for man to be alone. In fact, for most people, most men and women, the best plan for them is to, in fact, get married. That's why he said to avoid fornication. Let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. And then he speaks in verse 3 about let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence. And you go, well, if I knew what benevolence was, like to give her money, not exactly. Benevolence in the context means the love of mankind accompanied with a desire to promote their happiness. So when it speaks about a husband rendering unto his wife some due, she has some benevolence coming, that in this marital relationship that she's due something, that her husband would have a disposition to do good to her, that he would have goodwill, kindness, charitableness, that he would love her in a way that would also be accompanied with a desire to promote her happiness, what makes her happy, and a desire to do that. And Paul writes that in this relationship there is a due benevolence, that it falls upon the man, and then he's going to turn and say, and likewise the wife to the husband, that we in fact ought to have, there should be a natural desire in us to actually want to make our spouse happy. In fact, in chapter 7, verse number 33, it says, but he that is married, he careth for the things that are of the world, how that he may please his wife. And that's normal. It does potentially take some time away and some energy and focus attention away from maybe always being able to just do whatever, the Lord in a sense would want you to do at every moment of your life, because now not only are we in a sense property of God. Now just think about this, that when we get saved, you're not your own, you're bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. And at the very same time, as a married man, we find ourselves in this kind of a dual relationship, that we are property of God, who our body and our spirit, they belong to God. And yet at the very same time, we're yoked up in a one flesh relationship with our wife, and we two are one flesh. So there is this desire as a Christian man to please God with the way I live my life. And I also need to make sure that I'm giving attention to my wife. There is a due benevolence that I need to look out for her and for what's good for her, how to please her. And there are times that I found myself getting out of balance in our marital relationship as a younger preacher. I'm not so bad about that now as I was all those years ago, that I had my focus so much on the things of God that I neglected on too many occasions the need to make sure that my wife was taken care of and to please my wife. So it's a great balance. When you get back to verse 3, not 33, but back to verse number 3, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, her love for her, accompanied with the desire to promote her happiness. And likewise also the wife, that she has a responsibility to provide due benevolence to her husband, that we ought to both be concerned about the other one being pleased. In fact, in verse number 4, it picks up this issue on a very physical level, and I just want to be cautious because of young ones that are here, but we're all hopefully wise enough to pick up what the Lord's putting down. The wife, in fact, has not power of her own body. That's an interesting statement. That in this one flesh relationship, how do we dwell with them according to knowledge? Well, knowledge is that when we get yoked up in a one flesh relationship, that not only the wife has not power of her own body, but the husband, likewise also the husband has not power over his own body, but in fact the wife. Now this doesn't mean that we're to submit our bodies for things that are immoral or unethical or ungodly, but there is also in this one flesh relationship that we're not just can't just live our lives like we're single people. There is an obligation of due benevolence, and also there are physical bodies since we are yoked up that in this union, that there is an obligation to try to even use our physical bodies to promote the happiness of our spouse. In fact, so much is this an issue that he says in verse number 5, because he is going somewhere with this, to defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer. So there are times that we would defraud the other one of temporarily for the purpose of fasting and prayer of physical desires. But he says that you need to come together again so that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency or your lack of your ability to contain yourself. And one of the things that I've seen over the years is that when that physical part of a marriage relationship, when people begin to use that as a leverage tool, that you get into some really serious troubles. I talk to all these couples that I get an opportunity to talk to in premarital counseling. That, they say if you have a big enough lever, you can move the world. And so one of the leverage tools is, I'm not going to give you what you want until you give me what I want. And that's a dangerous game to play in a marital relationship, because of Satan can tempt you for your incontinency or your lack of ability to be able to restrain. And the body, we're supposed to use that to help please our spouse. And I think this comes in the physical side. It also comes inside the relationship side and the conversational side and the making each other feel special side. But I think, point well made. So when we're dwelling with each other according to knowledge, we understand that even on the physical side of the relationship, especially, that this one flesh relationship has some real ramifications. And the question begs, what is it exactly that I could do to show due benevolence that would promote the happiness of my wife, the happiness of my spouse? Turn, if you would, to the book of Ephesians. You're in 1 Corinthians, and I would ask you to turn to the book of Ephesians and land in chapter 5, where God, in fact, talks to the husbands about, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And not only did he love the church that way, but the fact is that he gave himself for it. And when a guy really comes to terms with the book of Ephesians chapter number 5, he begins to really understand that when the husband is what he's supposed to be and needs to be to his wife, that it also comes back to benefit him in the long run. Now, this motivation is not selfish, it is not self-centered, but the realistic view is that when we begin to step up and love our wives as Christ loved the church, there is a payout to that thing, and it's not just in the physical affection side. In fact, in verse number 26, he says that he might sanctify and cleanse it. That Christ loved the church, he loved his bride, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word. And not only that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. Now you take some godly women and they godly wives, and they learn how to live and be the wife that God calls them to be, even when their husband is not what he should be. That's a tremendous woman. But what we also have to understand is that women and men tend to be responders. And it makes it a whole lot easier for our wives, guys, to be what they're supposed to be biblically and in the eyes of God, when we're the husband that we need to be. And in fact, when we get this love thing right, and when we get this sacrificial part of the relationship right, the fact is that it pays off in big benefits. When Jesus was what he needed to be, he sanctified, he cleansed the church with the washing of the water by the word, and then that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives, in fact, as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. How is that the case? Because we're one flesh. And when a man loves his wife as his own body, he that loves his wife loves himself. Because the fact is, in verse number 29, that no man ever yet hated his own flesh. There hasn't yet been a man on the face of the earth that hated his own flesh. But in fact, man tends to nourish it, to feed, to cause it to grow, to supply the means of support or increase. That's nourish. And that men tend to cherish it, that is, to treat it with tenderness and affection, to hold it as dear, to treat it in a manner that encourages growth by protection, aid, attendance, or supplying nourishment. So, in other words, if you could just get a man, the typical man in this world, to love his wife like he loves his own flesh, and to take care of his wife like he takes care of his own flesh, she would be, in fact, very well provided for. And so it's no wonder that all the way back in the book of Genesis, God, who knows all things, that when he's going to make an help that is meet, that is suitable, appropriate for Adam, that he makes her, in fact, out of his rib when Adam was made out of the dust of the ground, and all the animals were made out of the dust of the ground, but his wife was made out of part of him. Because it's the most natural way to get a guy to love his wife the way he's supposed to love her is to bring her into a one flesh relationship or to make her a part of him, because no man yet hated his own flesh. And so this is why there's the great call. All you got to do, guys, is nourish your wife like you nourish your flesh. Cherish your wife like you cherish your flesh. And the fact is that, our wives are wanting that kind of stuff from us. What does my wife need to support her, to increase her, to encourage her? What does my wife need to know that I cherish her? How can I encourage her growth? How can I protect her, aid her, attend to her, and supply the things that she needs? Because this is the call to husbands. And no wonder the Apostle Paul goes to such great lengths here to compare the marital relationship to the relationship between Christ and the church, because if we could get it right like Christ got it right in regards to the church or to his people, then we would find that it would go much toward the advancement of having a happy marriage and a happy home. You might say, well, that would be inconvenient and costly for me to do that as a husband. You got that right. That's exactly right. And the fact is everybody who knows anything about marriage knows that it's much harder to have a long-term happy marriage and to keep that, kind of fire going. It's much harder than it seems like it should be. Because we live in a fallen world. And the fact is that in verse number 30, for we are members of his body and of his flesh and of his bones, and for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. And this is a great mystery, he says, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. And nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself. Because a wife needs to be loved, to feel loved. And in fact, it lands here in regards to, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. I'm not going to spend too much time here because we'll talk about this in greater detail next week, but really the word isn't even respect, it's reverence her husband. When you go to Colossians, your Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, we land with one verse there in Colossians chapter number 3, husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, Peter said. And when Paul is speaking and seeing the issues that husband and wives go through in their marriage, he speaks about this issue just kind of in passing and to the church that was at Colossus. He spoke to them about the issue in Ephesians, 1 Corinthians, because these marital issues are an issue really everywhere. Chapter 3, verse 19, husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Bitter means sharp, cruel, severe, as a bitter enemy. Sharp as words, reproachful, sarcastic. Husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Well, why in the world would a man be bitter against his wife? If you say that, you've never been married before, or you just got married. Because the fact is that in husband-wife relationship, things happen, don't they? We don't see things the same way. We get in disagreements. We sometimes have our spats, and it's easy enough. In fact, it's very common. And I know that a lot of women are like, well, I'm upset about stuff. I know, but, what I see with a lot of guys is the same thing that the Apostle Paul sees, is that when a man doesn't work through his issues of forgiveness and moving on and loving his wife like he should, that he will have a tendency to get bitter against her. You wonder why your husband is sharp in his words, sarcastic, reproachful. Why he tends to be cruel and or severe as a bitter enemy. And generally it's because there's some bitterness. You know, in the man culture, we may not be able to talk about it. You know, what's wrong with you, man? Nothing. It's nothing. No, what's wrong with you? Oh, man, me and my old lady, we got into it last night. Oh, yeah? Really? Yeah. Been treating her bad ever since, haven't you? Well, husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. How do you do that? You dwell with them according to knowledge, forgiving one another. Put away all anger and wrath, malice, right? And some of these principles that just guide healthy relationships. And you know, the fact is there's a lot of marriages that have been or are in serious trouble because of bitterness that set in, and they haven't worked through it. It's a real issue. Well, 1 Peter chapter 3, we'll pick it up there and cover a few things here, and then we'll move on. Dwell with them according to knowledge. Are you bitter at your wife? Some of the women would say, well, maybe you want to ask me if I'm bitter towards my husband. Are you? Maybe we'll talk about that next week. But tonight, husbands. 1 Peter chapter 3, as Peter writes these words, certainly as a man of wisdom and a man that's been married for a while, as an apostle, as a man under the inspiration of the Holy Ghost, he sees really two issues, which are kind of three issues inside of this single verse. Likewise, you husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge. What God says about marriage, what God says about a good relationship, what God says about the responsibilities that a husband has. The second issue that Peter sees is an issue of honor. And honor is esteem that is due or that we pay to something that we believe has worth. In other words, a high estimation. This is why when I talk about marriage and get the opportunity that I talk about, you know, in marriage, you need to learn how to see what's right and not what's wrong. See the good, not what's bad, because honor is something you give to something that you value it. You perceive that it has worth. And in any relationship, when you get more negative on it than you are positive, that relationship is potentially in trouble. And so when we look at our spouse, it's one of the things that Peter sees. He's like, you know, guys, it's not just only the issue of dwelling with them according to knowledge, but you need to give honor. You might say, well, she don't deserve it. Give it. Well, what if is there nothing you can see that is valuable about your spouse? That's why no matter where I go and talk about this issue of marriage, in speaking, you know, about my wife and our relationship, I say, you know, I can tell you a few negatives about my wife, but I can still tell you 10 good things for every one bad thing about my wife. And I know that I married a wonderful wife. And it irritates me when my preacher friends talk to me about how I married uphill because the fleshly side is like, well, she got a pretty good deal too. But when your friends can see, you got a good deal. And guys, I would just tell you that there are times that other men can see that we got a better deal than we can see. And when Peter's talking about the issue of honor, he's like, you just need to give honor unto her. Well, how would I give honor unto her? Well, you give honor unto her, number one, as unto a weaker vessel. And my wife, sometimes when we kid around and when in our younger marriage, and we'd kind of like, I'd try to wrestle with her, and she would say, "I'm not a guy." Okay. It's true. And giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel. Treat her as unto a weaker vessel. We have several things in our house that are very valuable. Most of them are more fragile. And we treat them differently. They get a different spot in the room, on the shelf, because we esteem that thing has value, and we treat it as unto a weaker vessel. Why would you do that? Because we can't easily replace it. It's costly. Or we can't find another one like that, just exactly like that. So we esteem it. The second thing he talks to them about in honor is as heirs together of the grace of life. And for anyone that looks at the Christian faith and says, you, the Christian faith, you men, you're a bunch of bigots. You treat your wife, you guys treat your wife like they're worthless and they're lesser or lower. This whole the husband's the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. I would just tell you, you don't understand the Christian faith at all. Because in honor, we're supposed to honor our wives as heirs together of the grace of life. We're both saved. We're both children of God. We're both on our way to heaven. And I just have thought from time to time over the years that I better be cautious how I treat God's daughter. And giving honor. Number one, as unto the weaker vessel. Number two, he says, because it was an issue back then. It's the same issues back then as we have today. That guys don't give honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and they don't treat them as, a fellow saved child of God that's on their way to heaven and just as valuable to God as I am. You might say, well, what if I don't? What if I don't want to do that? That your prayers be not hindered. Because there's no way that we're going to get prayers answered if we're mistreating our spouse. Well, when he says finally, he turns the corner, and I understand that this finally is in the context of he's talking to believers in general, but he really lands on some serious issues that affect us in our marriage too. Finally, he says, be all of one mind. And I found, just in marriage relationships, and not just marriage, but at church, that if we can get everybody on the same page, that if we be all of one mind, and so many times in our marriages, we're just not on the same page at all. We have different priorities. We have different goals. We have different emphasis in our life. And there's just something about a husband and wife being on the same page. Be ye all of one mind. And have some compassion, for crying out loud, on one another. Love plus sorrow for the struggles that they're going through. Do we have compassion on our spouse? Do we love as brethren? The fact is that we have a tendency to give more common decency and courtesy at times to our brothers and sisters in Christ at church than we do even our own spouse. And I can't tell you the number of times that it just happens over and over that, here are two people that can walk in those back doors, and obviously they know how to be a decent human being because they are for an hour or two around here on Sunday morning. But as soon as they walk out of the doors and they get in their car and they're on their way home, it turns into World War III. Well, love as brethren. have some pity on the other person? When did we leave off being courteous? I think for most of us, if we were honest, we would admit that we're more courteous to people at the grocery store or at the bank than we are to our own spouse. Be courteous. And in verse number 9, he talks about this issue of rendering evil for evil, not rendering evil for evil. And isn't that a tendency? That you hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you. You talk bad about me, so I'm going to talk bad about you. You hurt my feelings, so I'm going to hurt your feelings. Or railing. To rail is to yell, to raise your voice. Not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing. But contrariwise, he said, what we're supposed to be giving is, in fact, a blessing. And we all would admit that on a fleshly level, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. That the natural fleshly response is, you treat me bad, I'll treat you bad. You yell at me, I'll yell at you. But the Christian thing to do and the godly thing to do is to return a blessing. Why would you return a blessing? Because knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. That this marriage wasn't supposed to be a battlefield. It was supposed to be the relationship outside of Christ that was the greatest blessing in your life. And that this home was supposed to be a place that we actually have some peace, and that we can go and get away from the rough world and walk through the doors and actually be glad that we're home. Verse number 10, for he that will love life. You might say, I just want to have a good life and I just want to see good days, preacher. Okay, let's do that. Let him refrain his tongue from evil. And how many times have we caused our own issues in our homes because we just couldn't stop ourselves from saying what we shouldn't have said. You want to love life and you want to see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him, in fact, eschew, try to stay away from evil, and in fact, do good. What else should I do? Let him seek peace and ensue. Ensue is a very similar word to the term pursue. I want to have a happy home. I want to love my life. I want to see good days. I want our marriage to be happy and joyful. Then I need to learn how to refrain my tongue from evil and my lips that they speak no guile. I need to try to push away from evil, to stay away from evil and do good instead. And I need to seek peace, and I need to try to pursue it inside of my own home. For the eyes of the Lord, they are over the righteous. God sees what's going on behind closed doors, and his ears are open unto their prayers. God's eyes, the Lord's eyes are open, are over the righteous. He sees that we're trying. He sees that we're doing the best we know how to do under his commands, and his ears are open unto our prayers, unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them, in fact, that do evil. So when Peter talked about this issue of we need to dwell with them according to knowledge, that was a mouthful. What are my obligations? How's this relationship work? How can we work together? What should I be doing? How can I honor her? How can I please her? How can I, if I'm bitter, work through it? What if I'm bitter toward him? How can I work through that? And all these things go together to be a part of what actually makes for a very happy home. And so it's very interesting in this culture that 50% of marriages end in divorce. And then a way too large percentage of the ones that are still married are very unhappy inside the marriage, that relationship that they're in. But it doesn't need to be that way. There is a better way. There's a different way. There is a way to be on the same page, have a happy home, push away from evil, do good instead, seek peace, and pursue it in our homes. And there is a way to get a hold of our tongue and our lips to control what we say. The problem is the tongue can no man tame. And the only way that a tongue gets tamed is when our heart is tamed before God and by God. Because out of the heart proceed all these wicked things. And the only way we ever have a happy home and what God intends for it to be in fullness is that we have hearts that are right with God. To the husbands, that we would love our wives as Christ loved the church. It needs to be universal, not just when they please us or when they make us happy, but it needs to be all the time. Our love needs to be sacrificial. It needs to be visible. Does my wife know that I love her? How can I show her? I need to dwell with her according to knowledge, giving honor. And it doesn't say if she deserves it or if she giving honor as unto the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life. We're in this journey together. And we're figuring it out as we go, aren't we? But there is a way. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you'd forgive us, we men, we husbands, when we throw up our hands and say, who can understand women? Because there is a way, and in fact, there is a way of knowing what you say about it, of knowing your commands, your way, understanding ourselves, and how many times as husbands we're bringing the trouble and the conflict into the home. And I pray that we husbands would set out to be men that pursue peace in our homes. Pray, Lord, help us to get a hold of our mouth and tongue. Get a hold of our attitudes because they're right with you. Pray, Lord, for our wives that when they see us trying, that they would respond well. And Lord God, that we could have the kind of homes that you teach us we can have. The closest relationship in the world to what you have with your church. So, help us tonight, Lord. In Christ's name I pray. And all God's people said, amen. Let it